Here's all of our equipment, including star sand, a spray bottle, iodine. There's a probe thermometer clipped to the pot with 8 gallons of water kept at a steady temperature with an induction stove and electric range. That's the mash tun with the brew bag, and there's a micro scale, malt, hops, and yeast behind it. The sanitizing station is over here with some not yet sanitized equipment like a siphon, leaf tube, funnel, filter, etc. This is the start of the mashing process. We have 3 pots of spring water at different temperatures, that being 150 degrees, 120 degrees, and 190 degrees. Grace is adding our malt into the tun and stirring constantly while I add the water. We used mostly pale base malt with some biscuit malt and 45 level bond caramel malt, as well as a tiny bit of dark roasted malt for that amber color. It doesn't really impart any flavor. Using the probe thermometer to track the temperature of the mash was very useful, as we could correct the temperature back to 150 degrees by adding cooler and hotter water as needed. After 45 minutes, it's still at 150 degrees and we're ready to test for starch conversion into sugars. A drop of iodine into a sample of wort would have changed colors if there were still any unconverted starches. As you can see here, all the starches in our wort have already been converted to sugar. This is the Vorloff process, where the wort trickles out through a spigot in the bottom of the mash tun and gets poured back into the tun onto a diffuser plate at a mostly steady rate. The diffuser plate is to prevent channeling in the grain bed on the bottom. This process results in the wort passing through the grain bed a couple of times, clarifying it. As an example, the glass on the left is before Vorloff, and the one on the right is a sample from about halfway through. After about 15 minutes of Vorloff, we started the sparging process. We're pouring 165 degree water onto the diffuser plate, and at the same time the wort is coming out of the spigot into the pots we're using for boiling. The sugary wort is denser than the water, so you can actually see the water floating on top and pushing all the wort out. We used all the rest of our water for this. We split the wort equally between 2 pots for boiling, one in induction and one electric. Both are capable at holding a steady boil. Don't worry, the pot lid will be removed after this to let sulfur compounds boil off. We've scaled out and labeled the hops and split the Whirlflock tablet in 2. Over at the sanitation station, the carboy, wort chiller, and all the other equipment we need is freshly sanitized and ready to go. Now that a sample we took earlier has cooled, we can use it to measure the original gravity of the wort. We were hoping to get a reading of at least 1.045, however we're just shy of being in style for an American Amber Ale with a hydrometer reading 1.041. This is probably due to inefficient sparging on our part. At this point, the pot with the first half of the wort has been boiling for 45 minutes, so let's get back over to the stove. I'm adding half the Whirlflock tablet to the first pot now. Off to the side you can see a bowl and slotted spoon that we use to skim off the protein that coagulates on top. With 20 minutes left on the second pot, we're adding half an ounce each of Centennial and Cascade hops. 5 minutes later, and it's time to add the other half of the Whirlflock tablet. Finally, with 10 minutes remaining in the boil, we add another half ounce each of Amarillo and Citra hops. The leftover half ounce each of all 4 hops will be vacuum sealed and stored in the freezer for later. Okay, now we've attached the sanitized wort chiller to my kitchen sink. The cold tap water flows through the highly conductive copper pipe, cooling the wort quickly. The now hot tap water will flow out the other end and down the drain. We're cooling the first pot right now while the second pot finishes the boil. And while the wort is still hot, I'm stirring it in a whirlpool method to help force more proteins out of solution. It's extremely important to remember that once it comes off the heat, anything that touches the wort must be sterile. The first pot got to room temperature extremely quickly, and the second pot has just finished its boil. Let's give that a quick whirlpool and switch the pots out. With only half of the wort being cooled at a time, the temperature is dropping quickly. It took only 4 minutes for the second pot to cool from boiling to 130 degrees. We even timed it. Now that the wort is room temperature, we're ready to move it into the carboy. It took quite a while for the auto siphon to transfer over all the beer, as it kept getting clogged, but we managed. We're using a liquid yeast from White Labs, which is in a pure pitch next gen package. So the only steps for this are squishing around the package to mix it up, sanitizing the cap area, and squeezing it into the carboy. Very simple, and as you'll see in a minute, very potent. Yeast need oxygen to reproduce, so we're using an aerating paddle to get that going. Now it's time to clean up, and brew day is done! Here's the carboy, complete with airlock, sitting in a warmer spot in the apartment. Only 24 hours after brewing, and the yeast is happily bubbling away and frothy. Look at how much movement is in there! Things start to slow down 72 hours after brew day, but there's still plenty of movement. 2.5 weeks later, we dry hopped with the remaining ½ ounce each of all 4 of our hops. That should impart some nice hoppy flavor and aroma over the next 4 days before we bottle. With a little jiggling of the funnel, all the pellets went in. Now we just need to mix those pellets in with a little swirling action, and we'll see you next time for bottling day.